Hej och god förmiddag. Eller kanske god eftermiddag. Har det precis blivit. But I am actually going to do the rest of this in English, because that's the language I wrote the slides in. My name is Ella, and today I am here to talk about what magic can teach us about AI. Simsalabim. Over the last few years, we've gotten used to seeing this association between adding magic or adding AI to magic, or nej, nu får jag börja om. Over the last few years, we've gotten used to this idea that by adding AI to software, we create something magical. We see this in lots of different places, and so far to the point that that little sparkle emoji that used to be adding glamour to thoughts and ideas in manga comics and etc. actually just now means AI. The demos that we see all look magical. They all look like you're getting something from nothing. Here you're getting a whole bunch of ideas from just typing. And here in a still from I think this is a Google Gemini ad, you can find your glasses. It shows you finding your glasses somewhere in the room, which is magical and very useful. These kind of metaphors of magic are something that are also part of our lives as practitioners. When we test AI systems or AI services, we call it Wizard of Ozing. You test something that kind of doesn't exist yet, what it might look like and what it might be. Some of that is also, I think, a representation that our relationships with AI systems will be a little bit different to our relationships with existing technology. At the moment, I'm working on something called a retrieval augmented system, which is basically a large language model combined with sort of original sources. It hasn't launched yet, so that's why I can't share a real example. But for that one, we use a similar interface like this, where you don't search for information, you ask for information. It's a dialogue suggesting a slightly different relationship. It doesn't just get you something. You start a conversation with it, and you need to. A bit like you would ask a familiar. So what's going on here? What is this association, perhaps, between AI and magic? Part of it is that any sufficiently new technology is indistinguishable from magic. This is a terrible cliche, and we use it a lot in innovation slide decks. But I think it speaks to something quite human in our understanding of what new technologies are like. That's also true for senior engineers, because they're people too. This is a quote from a senior engineer in London called Sunil, saying that any programming tech made before I became a senior engineer is good and fundamental technology, but any after is magic and lazy abstraction. And I'll admit that with my marketing hat on, every time I see the words magic in an ad for any new AI system, I do think of this. It's magic. I ain't got to explain shit. It's just there. It is what I say it is. But what can magic teach us about AI if we take the magic part of that seriously? What if we go back into, in this case, in my presentation, European history, and think of how we've related to magic, what magic has been constructed of, who it sits with, and who has that power? Can it help us get beyond that binary of AI is good or AI is terrible? Let's see. This is from a text from the 16th century by a writer called Giambattista della Porta, explaining magic in this way. He says, it opens on to us the qualities and properties of hidden things and the knowledge of the whole course of nature. It's this idea that everything is interconnected and everything is related. If we could just tap into that power, shape it, we have something truly extraordinary. And you'll find echoes of this in the DeepMind founder Demis Hassabis' recent TED Talk from April 2024, although he just says, I call it like the tree of knowledge. Language changes. A theorist I like a lot, called Silvia Federici, describes magic as a variety of practices designed to appropriate the secrets of nature and bend its power to the human will. Or, in this case, Mickey Mouse trying to get a broom to do his housework. She also outlines the sorts of problems that people in the past tried to get magic to solve. And a lot of them will seem very, very familiar to those who follow what we're trying to get AI to solve today. For example, there was magic designed to win games. Well, in the past, it was card games, and here it's DeepMind's AlphaGo. This is a still from the entirely independent, I'm sure, documentary about that game. To play unknown instruments, like Holly Herndon's Holly Plus. To gain immunity in war, this is a startup called Helsing AI, who says that their AIs will only be used for defense. It's a classic problem. And here's a marketing site from a New York startup that promises that it can use AI to help children go to sleep. Let's see. I think there's a risk of thinking perhaps that these are only sort of European ways of thinking about the world and of the past, of different practices. But globally, magic and witchcraft have been associated with times of societal upheaval and change and inequality. And when you're writing these texts, you always have to ask, why now? I do think that this is why now. This is why magic comes, and this is why the AI sort of becomes so important to us to think about. There's lots of references there if you want to trust the books more than you trust me, which is probably sensible. I would argue that magic is a symptom, not the cause of these relationships between labor and production changing. We also see differences in the different practitioners of magic, who they are and where they get their power from. We have the magi, these sort of highfalutin, very sort of court sorcerers who are associated with hierarchical power, or, people in Silicon Valley. And then you have the witches who draw their magic from communities and from the commons, which is presumably the rest of us. Why is magic, and if we draw this metaphor closer, AI, so controversial? I think that it's in part because it appears that this illicit or unfair or sort of cheating form of power to obtain what you want without doing any of the work, either as an individual, as a company. If it's just introduced to you, you don't have to fix anything, you just put an AI on it, right? And I'm just going to say that there are people who still believe that today. This is from Mark Andreessen and presumably his ghostwriter. I can say that because I used to be a ghostwriter, just not his. We exist too. I'm intrigued by this idea that court magicians would promise knowledge and riches to the prince or to the courts, as long as they had access to all the information and all the supplies, or should we say compute power, that they need. And often, having a court sorcerer was seeming to be more important than anything they would actually achieve, which I think we can see with all the very rapid reverse acquisitions in Silicon Valley, where we're brought in all of these startups, AI startups, that really haven't found any product market fit, made any real money, and they're vastly, vastly, I would argue perhaps, overvalued. They're also always at risk of falling afoul of other sources of power, be it regulators or the Spanish Inquisition. And the same risks are, of course, true of witches, although a lot of those risks are very much more physical. We're seeing that this kind of worry and concern about witchcraft is in reaction to the commons being split up and privatized, and that these sorts of privatizations, or the use of the commons and of a free, open commons that you can draw knowledge and power from, was incompatible with a new sort of order and a change of things. In the past, this was moving on to the capitalist order, and I would argue we are now moving past it. And I think we see a lot of that in the relationship between large AI companies and the internet as a commons, which some of us, an idea that some of us was very much in love with, and that perhaps is struggling a little bit more today. I also think that saying something magic kind of makes it an easy out. It puts what determines action in the realm of the stars. We can't do anything about it. AI is going to change everything. There's nothing we can fix or do. But I think there's also a lot of hope and power in it. We see in medieval courts that magic, especially alchemy, morphs into other really influential and powerful ways of knowing and acting onto the world. Some of them might be personally interesting, like astrology, but we do see the roots of modern medicine and modern chemistry and physics in these court magicians. We also see that communal magic doesn't necessarily just go away. You know, the sort of ancient witchy practices don't necessarily just go away. They become subsumed in a dominant narrative. They can become part of people's everyday lives, especially at the point when they no longer represent a social threat. Though in the case of Taylor Swift and tarot cards, perhaps that is a little bit different. So if the theme of today is, now what? I guess I was thinking about what do we do with these sorts of things? Why do I, a person who works on services at the moment, it's for a climate tech thing, but a couple of months ago it was for a veterinary clinic. Why do I think that this is a useful way of approaching working with artificial intelligence? The first is that I believe that metaphors are the kind of Freudian slips of the technology world. They're the things that we say by accident that come out, but that have much more meaning than we do. I think there is something peaceful in history in showing us that we are not alone. These changes might seem giant and big and ambivalent and ambiguous in what they might achieve, but they're not new to us. We've had other ways, other people far in the past in different parts of the world have thought about similar problems and challenges before, and they have managed, other than if their witch is burned at the stake, to move past it and through it and find new ways of functioning. And I think it also shows us ideas and archetypes for who we might want to be in this sort of future. Do you want to be a magus doing elite magic with vast amounts of funds? Do you want to be a part of your community, even knowing that the risks is? And does it mean that perhaps we should be trying to tie those two forms of being closer and practicing closer together? I think finally it also shows that we are used to designing as humans, even though we haven't necessarily thought of this, for ambivalent and uncertain outcomes. We see with a lot of Gen AI systems at the moment that what happens with them, what the user finally sees, is often unpredictable. And I think, of course, we can make funny jokes about it, and of course we can. But I think as designers and people working on them, if we want to look into their power and think about it and take that seriously, how do we help users think about interacting with a system that might give them a very different response every time? It's an ambivalence that we've lived with in the past. It's an ambivalence that we've known and understood as cultures. And as these cultures here, you know, there were häxprocesser fanns ju här också, liksom. And we've learned and designed and thought about in those ways before. We know it doesn't always work, but that becomes fine, and we can live with that and manage it. Or, as they said in magic books in the 16th century, which I didn't tell my client the other week when I said what it should say on the interface for the RAG system, but I could have done. Read with care and precision, dear reader, and you will marvel and not be sorry. Thank you. Thank you.